Hello, welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Molero.
And we are the FAIRtax Guys. And as far as I can tell, we have not made any progress on the president getting rid of the Social Security payroll tax that we talked about last week. Hopefully, well, or maybe by the time this comes on, we've had something happen.
Yeah,
but it's interesting that he wants to do that.
And you know, even with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, doubling the standard deduction for a married couple to $24,000, that just happens to be the prebate figure for pretty close to for a married couple. So they keep inching towards the fair tax.
Yes, they do.
Yeah. So
now, speaking of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, I don't know if you were planning to get into this right away or later in the program.
No,
but you've got something here called "Clean Up the Glitch."
Yeah, let's
want to save that.
Let's do the grassroots corner because this episode is going to focus on how the fair tax will help business, and let's do the grassroots corner because this is a doozy.
Yeah.
Okay,
stay tuned for Clean Up the Glitch, though. It's good.
Grassroots corner from March 13th. This is from Jim Bennett, AFFT grassroots director. Jim.Bennett at fairtax.org. Jim.Bennett at fairtax.org. Making it itch in Iowa. Okay, fair taxer Claude Mersenich from Decorah, Iowa, is the itch to Congresswoman Finkenauer that won't go away. Just recently, the Congresswoman sent a newsletter to her constituents ballyhooing the help that her office gave a constituent who was having trouble with his federal taxes. Oh, what a shock.
Somebody having trouble with their taxes and having to conduct...
I can't imagine. Yeah.
Wow.
So, here's the newsletter excerpt. Helping our friends and neighbors. A constituent from Waverly contacted our office. He has not received his federal income tax refund. He filed on time, and his state return refund came within a few weeks, but his federal return not yet. We contacted the IRS and learned that there was a discrepancy in what he reported and what he could prove. The IRS had not notified the constituent that there was a problem. All right. But we were able to tell him how to fix the problem and file an amended report. Isn't the income tax wonderful?
Oh, yeah. I mean, how can you have a discrepancy if the law is easy to understand? You can only have that when there's half a dozen multiple ways to figure your taxes.
And wait till you hear about his refund here, because I'm not sure. All right. He has followed the steps and is expecting an $18,000 refund. That's a sizable refund.
That's a mighty big interest-free loan to be making to the government.
He made an interest-free loan of $18,000 to the federal government. What a nice guy.
Oh, wow. Okay.
If you or anyone you know is having trouble with the IRS, Social Security, disability, Medicare, or a veteran issue, contact our office and get help. Okay.
It's laudable that a congressperson wants to help a constituent with a tax problem.
Yeah.
Now let's see if she'll take it to the next level.
Let's see how Claude followed up on this. All right. Congresswoman obviously was getting mileage out of the taxpayer's misfortune by making it the subject of a newsletter. However, the newsletter came before the wrong pair of eyes, mainly Claude. All right. He picked up his pen and wrote the following to the woman's staffer. Hello, Stephanie. I see the following in the latest weekly update from Congresswoman Finkenauer. Okay. Under the Fair Tax, H.R. 25, there will be no filing of income tax returns because there will be no income tax, and everyone will get their full paycheck without any withholding. All right.
You cannot make an interest-free loan to the government if they don't take your money from you before you get it.
And under the fair tax, the constituent mentioned above would never have the problem he or she encountered under the current unwieldy, inefficient, unfair, loophole-ridden system of taxation. All right. So Claude made it clear in no uncertain terms there is a way to fix this problem, and it's called the fair tax. So thanks, Claude.
Hopefully the congresswoman will listen to him.
Yeah. Well, he is not giving up. He's been on this. He goes to her town halls. I see emails and Facebook messages and so forth, and he's keeping after it. He's very pleasant and he's very respectful and so forth, but he's unrelenting also. So, all right, if you have
that's
any,
how you got to be.
Yep. If you have a good piece of information or a report of the grassroots nature, contact Jim Bennett, jim.bennett@fairtax.org, jim.bennett@fairtax.org. And who knows, you could become a star.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, that Congresswoman's a Democrat, right?
Yes.
So it does not matter whether it's a D or an R. Get on your Congress people, because the fair tax appeals to everybody.
Absolutely.
Everybody would like to bring home their full amount of their paycheck. Everybody would like to be relieved of the drudgery of filling out tax returns. This is not an ideological, it's not a political thing. It's something that everybody would love to have.
Yeah.
Right.
And today we're going to focus on businesses.
Indeed.
And something on, I get the morning tax every morning. It's an email from Politico. Clean up the glitch.
There we go. I want to hear this.
It probably shouldn't be a surprise that the retail and restaurant groups are trying to get the mistake in the 2017 tax law, which makes it more expensive to write off renovations, fixed in the coming legislative response to the coronavirus. So they're trying to mix it. There's a mistake made in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
Wait a minute. Congress critters make mistakes? Are you kidding?
I know, it's hard to believe, but you know.
I'm shocked.
So there was a mistake in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and in order to try to fix this mistake, and it's hurting retailers and restaurateurs, okay? It's hurting them. So they're right now talking about, as we report this, they're talking about doing some kind of legislative correction or relief on taxes because of the coronavirus. And so they're trying to put this fix into the bill with the coronavirus issues.
Isn't it amazing how you can have a bill that's supposed to address a certain subject and it is loaded up with all kinds of other stuff that has nothing to do with the intended, or at least the stated purpose of the bill?
Yeah, it's just a little nuts. No, actually, it's a lot nuts. It's crazy.
Absolutely.
Okay? So,
and they do that to the tax code all the time, so we need to get rid of all that junk.
How do we introduce this next point? Years ago, when Mark Upton was the state director for the fair tax, one of our volunteers wrote to him and said, "Mark, if we're going to push the fair tax, and make it aware, people aware of it," he used the phrase, "Don't sell the steak, sell the sizzle." All right, if you're in a restaurant and the waiter goes by with a sizzling steak, that gets your attention.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, unless you're a vegetarian. But anyways,
don't go there.
Mark asked everybody to come up with their best, and they started calling them sizzle points. All right, your best one-liners that would help people, that help attract people. Well, I saw some of these coming in, and I thought, these fit very nicely into a Jeff Foxworthy style of presentation, all right? And we did some for regular, tax advantages. And we also did a bunch for businesses. And today we want to concentrate on business, okay? So
I haven't done Foxworthy in a long time.
Yeah, but I am very confident that it will come back to you.
If anybody knows Jeff Foxworthy and can solicit his assistance in selling the FAIRtax here, we'd like to hear about that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Jeff, we are at your beck and call. All right, so anyways.
No charge for that.
So there are a bunch of advantages to businesses, especially small businesses, of the fair tax, and we're going to go over as many as we have time for.
So we've did these things into the Foxworthy style. Of course, his big thing is, if this and this and this and this, you might be a redneck.
Yeah.
So we did this, you might be a FAIRtax fan.
Yeah.
Okay. So all right. Let me try to conjure up Foxworthy here.
Here is Mr. Bob Paxworthy.
If you'd like your business tax compliance cost to drop by at least, and probably more than 80%, you might be a FAIRtax fan.
Yeah.
Compliance costs, they are a killer to business.
especially small business.
Not only just the amount of money you have to pay to keep yourself out of jail, you know, the time and effort and the stuff you got to put into that kind of stuff is money you don't have to spend and time you don't have to spend improving your business.
Yeah.
So if you get rid of the compliance costs, which are just passed on to your customers, by the way, you might be a FAIRtax fan if you're a small business person who's tired of dealing with that garbage.
Absolutely. And I'll give you the example that I've used before. My wife and I, we drove a commercial truck team for 5 years, and then we bought additional trucks and leased them out to people. Okay, and we had to keep records. We had to use QuickBooks and so forth. And then at the end of the year, we would send that all to our accountant, who would look through them, make sure I didn't make any mistakes, correct things that I did. So even in a year in which we had enough expenses to cancel out our income and we owed no tax, I still had to pay the accountant between $500 and $1,000 to make sure that my bookkeeping was correct and to make sure that our corporate tax return was correct. Okay, so yeah, on small businesses, compliance costs are really serious. Yeah,
and the FAIRtax makes them go away.
Yeah, absolutely,
entirely.
Absolutely.
Unless you're dealing on a retail level, you have no interaction with the tax system at all. If you're a wholesaler or a supplier, something like that, the retailers will collect it, and it'll be kept track of by their point of sale software. The computers will do it for them. Nobody else has to no other businesses have to even deal with the FAIRtax.
That's right. The FAIRtax, the corporations will not be, only the final consumer pays the FAIRtax. So retailers have to collect the FAIRtax. Most businesses actually sell to other businesses. And so there'll be no tax component for them at all.
Manufacturers, distributors,
sure,
wholesalers, things like that. Now here's something that does affect every business. If you'd like to simplify payroll calculations by eliminating withholding, you might be a FAIRtax fan. Of course. The FAIRtax gets rid of the income tax, and the income tax is what you have to have withheld from your paycheck. No income tax, no withholding. The business doesn't have to deal with it, and the employee brings home more money without actually costing the business another dime.
So let me get this straight. It saves the business money.
Correct.
And the employees get a bigger paycheck.
Correct.
That sounds like a pretty good deal.
It is.
Yeah.
I like that. We need to get on our Congress critters and tell them to pass it.
Yeah. So who wouldn't like this? Who exactly wouldn't like this? All right.
Well, professional tax attorneys and lobbyists don't like that because they're the ones that have, the lobbyists more so than the others, that they make their living selling tax favors or buying tax favors for their clients.
Yeah.
and padding the Congress critters campaign accounts with contributions. Now here's a good one. If you'd like to see American products be more competitive on the world market, you might be a FAIRtax fan. That takes a little bit of explanation. How the FAIRtax will make American businesses more competitive, and just about everything now is sold on the global market.
Yeah. So right now, when a company makes a product that's going to be sold overseas, they are burdened by the extremely high compliance costs. Compliance costs anywhere from like 17 to 30%, an average of 22%. All right, is what they figured. So when our products go overseas, they are burdened with this compliance cost. And when we get rid of that compliance cost by getting rid of the income tax.
Yeah, and what the problem is that the income tax system in America is such that the embedded costs, the tax liability and the compliance costs that American businesses have to deal with and have to pass on in the price of their products includes the price of exports. So when something from an American business or an American manufacturer hits the global market, part of that wholesale price is the embedded cost of the income tax system. Now, of course, the other countries have tax systems as well, but especially in Europe, when they got that VAT, the VAT tax, when a European article or good hits the world market, that manufacturer, the government refunds back to that manufacturer the amount of VAT tax that has been, collected up to that point. So the American company and the European company can have a pretty much ideal or identical kind of product, both of them that cost about the same to produce, but the American company's price has to include the embedded tax systems. The European company's price doesn't. They undercut the American business by quite a good bit, and guess who suffers in that system? Not just the American, but the people who work.
That's right.
For the American business.
So
the demand for your product goes down if somebody's undercutting your price.
Yep. Yeah. At this time, American companies are at a severe disadvantage in competing with foreign countries. Okay.
Yeah, that's why a lot of them have gone overseas. We talked about tax inversions last week.
Yep. And the fair tax will take care of a lot of that. So there's another good reason that businesses will love the fair tax.
If you're tired of being punished for your productivity, you might be a FAIRtax fan.
Yeah, because the more productive you are and the more income you take in, the more you're penalized, whether it's an individual or a business. You know, and well, take a look at what happened with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Now, that wasn't the fair tax, but it wasn't tax reform, but it was tax relief, and they did get tax relief. Businesses got tax relief in the form of lower corporate taxes, and the repatriation tax went way down too. And so what did we see? All kinds of money coming back into the country. Apple announcing that they were spending like $50 billion back in this country and opening up a new plant. Other countries too. Yeah, so when you drop the tax rate down a little bit, we get more business in this country. So what would it be like if it went to zero?
I think we would be the most business-friendly place on the planet, and you would have to be hiding under a rock not to get a job if you wanted one. But talking about being punished for your productivity, how many times do you work hard, you get a raise, that raise pushes you up into the next tax bracket, and you get a higher salary, but bring home less because the government's grabbing more of it.
And that happens. And it happens with individuals, and it happens with businesses too. All right? Because right now, they get penalized. So we saw with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that by reducing tax rates, it increases business here at home, which creates more jobs.
Yeah, I personally know someone who had to go to their employer and ask them to take back the raise because it resulted in a lower paycheck.
Wow. That's amazing.
It's insane.
Yeah, take back the raise.
Yeah. I'm being punished for my productivity, and so the government wants more of my money.
Yeah.
So if you'd like to have more time and money to expand your business, you might be a FAIRtax fan. Again, dealing with the compliance costs you time and costs you money. Compliance costs go away with a fair tax because you no longer have to pay attorneys. You no longer have to pay tax accountants. Of course, you have to keep records for your own business purposes, but you no longer have to put all this time and effort into keeping your can out of jail. By making sure that what you report to the IRS is accurate, because there is no IRS with a fair tax.
Yep. And I remember one of our FAIRtax volunteers nearby talking about when he was helping with a small airport up in New Jersey. A friend of his passed away, and he was helping his widow run this airport. And they had to spend between $35,000 and $40,000 a year on accountants and tax attorneys and so forth to tell the IRS that they didn't owe them any money.
Yes.
Right.
And that was passed along in the price of fuel that they had to charge when people come in and filled up their airplanes with avgas.
Yeah. So it's just crazy. All right. To spend money to tell the IRS you don't owe them any money.
Well, you've had to do that. So this is a big one. If you'd like to remove the need for lobbyists and therefore level the playing field for small and large businesses, you might be a FAIRtax fan. We often wonder, why do business people like the income tax? And it finally dawned on me that the big companies that can hire these lobbyists and get these tax favors believe that the income tax system is giving them an advantage. And they think getting rid of the income tax is giving up their advantage.
Yep. And I've heard this from my congressman.
Steve Hayes has talked about that in his chairman's reports too.
Yep. Congressman Yoho here, who's retiring at the end of this year from Congress, but he always brings up the fair tax. He was in a meeting with heads of large corporations, and when he brought up the fair tax, they were very cool to the idea because, like Bob said, they can afford the lobbyists. It's part of their expense of doing business. But a small mom and pop business, we can't send lobbyists to Washington,
That's just part of the way these lobbyists and Congress critters work. They sell these things by making people believe that you're getting a break that somebody else isn't, so therefore you should be really thankful for what we've done for you. And by the way, you have to abide by all these complex rules, or you can go to jail. So
it's not a good situation.
So yes, right? I would love to remove lobbyists from the process of writing the tax code.
Yep.
Because with the fair tax, there's one rate. It applies to everybody. Any changes apply to everybody. And it's printed right there on your receipt. Every time you buy something, how much fair tax you pay. You see every time you make a retail purchase how much government is costing you. And that scares the snot out of the folks up there in Washington that are ripping us off
they don't
left
like
and right. I'm not sure I should
They like the complication and the fact that it's a mystery to most people.
Yeah, I probably should have used another word there, but that's okay.
That's okay. All right. Sometimes the expression gets the message
We
across.
can get away with this. If you'd like your business-to-business purchases to be tax-free, you might be a FAIRtax fan. If you are buying raw materials, if your business is building, shacks or wooden, utility buildings, and you go down to Home Depot and you buy a bunch of plywood that you're going to, mold into your product, there is no tax on that purchase. So Home Depot doesn't have to mess with collecting it from you. You don't have to pay it.
Yeah.
Business-to-business sales are not taxed under the fair tax. The fair tax is a retail consumption tax paid by the final consumer to whom all of the embedded costs roll down anyway. So there you go. It's just a lot simpler. You get the same money. The government gets the same amount of money. Prices will stay fairly close. There are people who will tell you the fair tax is going to make everything 23% more expensive. They are just not telling the truth at all.
They don't know what they're talking about, all right? This is a very important concept with the fair tax when it applies to business. Business-to-business purchases are not subject to the fair tax. And all the compliance costs, the embedded costs that we're talking about now, that's because businesses do pay taxes when they buy stuff.
So the cost of those raw materials that you buy goes down because there's no longer
the fair tax.
There's no longer the embedded cost of the income tax system in the price of the stuff that you're buying wholesale.
Yeah.
Because in the case of wood, there's the tree farmer, then there's the guys that cut it down, then there's the lumber mill, then there's a lot of steps that go through.
Yeah.
And if you have a VAT tax, you get a tax added at every one of those steps.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that's nasty. You don't want to do that.
VAT tax is a bad idea.
It's a horrible idea. If you'd like to see outsourced jobs come back to the United States, you might be a FAIRtax fan. We talked about this last week with the corporate inversions. How many companies have fled this country in search of more favorable tax treatment? And if we had a system where there is no corporate income tax, they don't have to deal with that. They can expend 100% of their effort on growing and expanding their business. They come here. It's that simple.
And have you noticed, Bob, that since the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, with the corporate tax going down and the repatriation tax going down, we haven't heard that much about inversions.
No.
All the reports that I have about inversions are like 2017 and before. Mm-hmm. I haven't seen any reports since then. Okay? Yeah, because they're making it easier to do business here in this country, which helps our people, creates jobs here. And that's what would happen with the fair tax. It reduces the complexity, it alleviates the corporations of unnecessary taxes, and it lets them expand and create jobs. And that's what Americans do best.
If you missed last week's episode, the list of iconic companies who have left America and are now incorporated or headquartered overseas is astounding. You need to go check that out. With Anheuser-Busch, for one, trying to remember some off the top of my head.
Burger King.
Your Purina Dog Chow, all those folks.
Good humor.
Go back and check last week's episode for the entire list. But it is, and I would bet you just about every one of those companies would come back if we had the fair tax and they didn't have to deal with a, just incredibly complex and cumbersome tax system here in America.
Yep.
And on a related note, if you'd like to see trillions of offshore dollars returned to the United States, you might be a FAIRtax fan. How much money that is being earned by these American companies doing business overseas is kept overseas because they don't want to pay the high tax rates here.
Yeah, and again, we've seen this, we keep saying, going back to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, but they're helping to make the case for the fair tax because they dropped the corporate tax. The big one there is they dropped the repatriation tax. And indeed, some of that American money that's held offshore, American companies that also do commerce overseas and make money overseas, and they're not bringing it back because the repatriation tax was so high. Well, that repatriation tax came down, and guess what? Money started coming back. So what happens if it goes to zero?
There you go.
Lots of money comes back.
I can't believe it. We're going to get through the whole list here. There's one more. If you believe the current tax system is not of the people, by the people, and for the people, excuse me, you might be a FAIRtax fan.
All
right.
And
Go ahead.
It is not of the people, by the people, and for the people. And remember, we'll say it again, corporations are made of people. For those people say the corporations must pay their fair share, the corporation is not some brick building somewhere. It is people. Randy says it's a legal fiction, but it is made of people. It's got shareholders, it's got employees, it's got managers, it's got customers, and so forth. That nonsense about the corporations paying their fair share is people are either uninformed or they're purposely trying to mislead you. Don't fall for it, all right?
Okay, we got to get going here. We're just about out of time. What can people do to make the fair tax happen? First and foremost, share the FAIRtax Guys, FAIRtax Power Radio episodes with your family and friends. Educate yourself and educate as many of your family and friends as you can on the fair tax, because I have never met anybody that I explained the fair tax to that they didn't like. Everyone says, why aren't we doing that already?
Yeah. And a good way to educate yourself, these two books right here. All right, start with the white one, go to the red one. This is a great way to educate yourself. Okay.
Join Americans for Fair Taxation. If there's a state level organization, Florida here is one of the states that has a very strong state level fair tax group. Texas, Alabama as well. Especially if you're in Alabama or Georgia, get on board and try to help them get their fair tax passed at the state level.
From what we learned last week, Nebraska has a pretty strong group too.
Indeed. So call your talk shows. Write letters to the editor in support of the fair tax. There are things you can do that will cost you no money at all, a little bit of time, but that's it. But it will be so worth it. But again, first and foremost, share FAIRtax Power Radio episodes. Tell your friends all about them. You find us on YouTube. You'll find us on FAIRtaxGuys.com. You can find the audio version on Spreaker. There's just a lot of ways that you can listen to FAIRtax Power Radio. And that's going to...
And you can go to the FAIRtax Logo Store, too, fairtaxlogostore.org.
Okay, and that's going to wrap up this edition of FAIRtax Power Radio. Once again, I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Malero.
The FAIRtax Guys reminding you that the fair tax is the only truly fair tax, and once you understand it,
you'll demand it. Thank you.
So what do you need from me to get these taxes collected?
Glad you asked, because there is a fair amount of information you need to be aware of.
That's your tax plan?
Oh, no, this is just the revisions for this year's tax plan. What I need from you is you need to keep track of all of your income, as well as any taxes that you've already paid, and also any gifts that you received or gifts you've given to churches or charities or individuals throughout the entire year. Do you do any side jobs?
Every now and again.
Great, because there's some more information about that right here. Everything you need to know right here. So just simply compile that. Send it in to us. Be careful, make sure there's no mistakes. If we do find mistakes were made, we can fine you or, throw you in jail. So you might want to be aware of that.
And what do you need from me?
As an individual, nothing. As a business owner, or if you're doing side jobs, yes, you would have to collect taxes on that, but, it's all right here.
Can I get a copy of that?